So we've come to the end of World War One. You've seen some of the battles and the personalities in the presentations that you've been doing and seeing, but you'll notice we don't spend an inordinate amount of time on World War One. A lot of that is because the United States isn't directly involved in the conflict nearly as long as everybody else, and it also is overshadowed a lot of times by World War II. We're going to see how the end of World War One sets up the start of World War II today. World War One ends on November 11th, 1918. As I'm recording this, today is November 11th. Today we call that Veterans Day. It used to be called Armistice Day before World War II. It was a day to remember the armistice that ended World War One. Today it's a day that we honor all veterans who have served in the military. The war ends November 11th in 1918 at 11 p.m. So it's 11:11 at 11. They make that decision. Of course, that's very symbolic. The Germans surrender in a train car in Paris. And there's video of them walking in to surrender. Now, the interesting thing is going to be, in 1940, when France surrenders in World War II, Adolf Hitler makes them surrender in the same train car. And so he was a student of history. He had actually served in World War One. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to World War II and talking about him. But definitely a student of history and wanted to roll back the end of the war. But 11:11 at 11 p.m. the war ends. Hostilities will cease. What follows is a conversation about what the world's going to look like. People from all over the world descend on the Palace of Versailles to the north of Paris, France, for the treaty writing. Our own president, Woodrow Wilson, will be the first sitting president to leave the country and travels to Europe to help write this treaty. He's got some very strong ideas about what the world needs to look like, and he's got a great deal of influence in these negotiations. The interesting thing is the Allies will sit down and do this treaty, but Germany is not at the table. This is going to be a treaty that is done to Germany without German participation. That, of course, is going to lead to some bitter feelings as well. Germany is going to be charged with starting the aggressive war and paying for the aggressive war. So reparations are in order. They're going to be ordered to pay back $33 billion in damages to different countries. They just finished making those payments in the last 10 years or so. It's going to devastate the German economy, though it's a terrible idea. It's vengeance, but like I said, the German economy is going to go straight into the toilet, and it's going to make conditions ripe for the rise of the Nazis in the 1930s. Germany is forbidden to have a large army. They thought, hey, if they don't have a large army, then they can't be aggressive anymore. And new borders and boundaries are going to be set. And look back at that map activity that we did, and look and see how that map changed. Germany's going to lose a lot of territory. Austria-Hungary is going to be split in half. There's a region between Germany and France that France is going to control. It's going to be one of the first things that Hitler's going to invade in World War II. Hopefully you're getting the idea that the end of World War One is such a disaster that basically makes World War II inevitable. But here is the pre-World War One map. And so you see how big Germany is. Austria-Hungary is one country. We'll take a good look at that, and then I'm going to switch it to post-World War One. Post-World War One certainly looks a lot different, right? We've got the country of Poland that's been created, the country of Czechoslovakia that's been created. Austria and Hungary has really shrunk. Germany has shrunk, and there's the Soviet Union and those Soviet bloc countries that are there. Poland's got an interesting story if you're just looking to kick around something with history today. Look up the story of Poland. It had been a country in the 1800s, had gone away, and then is kind of resurrected. The start of World War II, though, happens when Germany invades Poland, and Britain will declare war on Germany for doing that. So, again, all kinds of seeds in the end of this conflict that are going to grow into the conflict that will happen in the 1940s. But lots of different countries that are going to be there after World War One is finished. Another thing that's going to happen is one of the kind of minor players in World War One on the side of the Axis powers is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is modern-day Turkey, but they basically controlled all of the Middle East. And the Ottoman Empire is kind of the last great empire on earth after the Greeks and the Romans. And when it dies, those countries will be split into the countries that we know today. Countries like Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and even a country called Palestine. Palestine is where the modern state of Israel is. We'll talk about that when we get to post-World War II. But as the Ottoman Empire dies, you've got all kinds of brand new countries showing up in the Middle East as well. One of the things that Woodrow Wilson wants to do is he wants to have an international organization. I think countries can join a place where they can come and talk about their issues with each other instead of meeting on the battlefield. Love this idea. And he called it the League of Nations. And the League of Nations is formed after World War One with the idea that this is going to keep World War II from happening. The crazy thing is, though, is the United States, even though our president comes up with a lot of these ideas, the Senate of the United States is going to refuse to sign the Treaty of Versailles. And so we never join the League of Nations. And so we never kind of get to have a seat at the table where we're talking about these conflicts. We will join the organization that replaces the League of Nations after World War II. That's an organization called the United Nations. And we've been a member of that since the end of World War II. And it's got the same purpose, that it is meant to cut off conflict before it comes to war. America, though, is going to go isolationist. Right? If you know anything about isolation, right, it means you're all by yourself. We thought these oceans we've got on the east and west coast are going to protect us. We won't worry about any kind of European entanglements. And so basically the idea was we're not going to have a part in these European conflicts because we don't think that they directly apply to us. Now the Japanese, when they bombed Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, are going to prove that our oceans aren't going to protect us, and that we don't want to abdicate responsibility in parts of the world. But in the interim time period between these two wars, really the 1920s and 30s, the United States is going to be very isolationist. So how does this lead to World War II, right? The Treaty of Versailles, the Germans are going to resent it. They're not invited to sit at the table, and so they feel like this is being done to them and not with them. The reparations in that treaty are going to lead to an economic collapse in Germany that is going to leave the populace vulnerable for the messages that will be coming out of the Nazi Party. The lost territory that they're going to get just set up to be future targets. What we're going to see in the beginning of World War II is Hitler going into some of these places, taking them over, and it being something that bolsters his standing with the populace. They're looking at him as rolling back the Versailles Treaty. Because we don't join the League of Nations, it's got no power, and so it's not going to be as effective as it would have been if we joined. And World War I is going to have a great effect on the psyche of the world. We're going to see, as we start to look at the buildup of World War II, a world that is terrified of another conflict like this happening. There are millions of young men, an entire generation of young men in Europe who are gone because they've died in World War I. And so we're basically willing to do just about anything to avoid that happening again in World War II, up to the point where we let things go long enough that World War II becomes inevitable. And so, like I said, we're going to hit World War II a lot more, but hopefully a little bit more after these 3 or 4 lessons about World War One. If you're interested, I've got a movie in the film library called War Horse. I've got another great one called All Quiet on the Western Front, which is kind of neat because it's from the German perspective in the war. There are, if you like Downton Abbey, there's a season of Downton Abbey that deals with World War One. Like I said, 1917 is a new movie that's out that I've got in the film library if you're interested. The Guns of August is a wonderful book talking about the start of the war. Just had a chance to read that over the summer, and it's a neat book about how all these assumptions these countries have about each other and how it leads to the start of the conflict. So lots of other resources out there for you if you want to check out a little bit more of World War One. Just come see me. I'll hook you up with something good.